My earliest memory of what prayer was around the age of 6 or 7 or so, after I had lost one of my very favorite toys. My grandmother said, "Don't worry, sweets, we'll find it. Just say a prayer to St. Anthony. It'll turn up." So I didn't exactly know who this guy Anthony was or how he was going to help me find my beloved toy, but I was desperate. So I asked her, "Grandma, how do I pray to St. Anthony?" And she led me through it. We closed our eyes, we did the sign of the cross, and I said, "Dear St. Anthony, I lost my favorite toy today, and I can't find it anywhere. Can you please look over me and help me find it? I hope it turns up soon. Thank you. Amen." So did anyone else grow up praying to St. Anthony? Any others? All right, we've got a few in the back. So for those of you who did not, St. Anthony is the Catholic patron saint of lost things. And in Catholic prayer, it's completely acceptable to pray to a saint to intercede on our behalf, no matter how big or small the request. And I think we probably all have some association with the word prayer, whether it's from childhood or even a sort of allergic reaction to it. And I think we can all agree that prayer has at times been constructed and used in ways that are anything but life-giving. But this morning I want to investigate this concept we call prayer in its many forms, to consider how it might act as a powerful thread between us and the transcendent, between us and stillness, between us and relief. Poet Mary Oliver, who some might call a UU saint, if we had those, calls prayer, quote, paying attention. She writes that the real prayers are not the words, but the attention that comes first. And at a time when we are more distracted than ever, with ever-increasing responsibilities and expectations on our lives, with distressing news flying at us locally and globally, we're also experiencing a renaissance in ways to do anything but pay attention. Case in point, right here. I'm no better. This morning alone, I've already taken a selfie, sent a few Twitter DMs, and liked a few photos. Maybe some of you have done the same before our moment of spiritual connection this morning. So in this context, thinking of prayer as a moment of paying attention is almost countercultural. These glimpses of paying utter attention to that before us, that going on within us, are hard to come by if we aren't intentional about it. And when I think back on my 6-year-old self, I'm not entirely surprised that I didn't know how to pray. Although there are definitely guidebooks and rules for that sort of thing, prayer is also a concept and a practice that provides for personal flexibility and improvisation. There are lots of models out there. Pretty much every religious movement and institution has a recommended prayer practice. Spiritual individuals have developed fascinating and new ways to think about prayer, and others have even reclaimed and repurposed ancient contemplative practices in new and innovative ways. In seminary, we learned the many different types of prayers: supplication, thanksgiving, praise, intercession. The list goes on. Prayer isn't always to a deity, although it certainly can be. It can also be to ancestors, to the universe, to one's own self. It can be said aloud, it can be chanted, it can be sung, it can be danced. It can be recited in our own minds. And still, it can be no words at all, instead focusing on breath or stillness. It can be done alone or with a group, on a mat or on a chair, lying down or kneeling, or even on a walk. From a house of worship like this, or from our bedroom, from the beach, from an airplane, especially an airplane, depending on the level of turbulence. So it's clear that prayer happens in many ways, in many places. But why do we do it? What is this impulse that many of us have to pray or to find moments of stillness and quiet. It turns out there's lots of good reasons to pray, including scientific ones, which I think some of you will appreciate. Beyond the sense of community or comfort or gratefulness that we may experience as a result of prayer, it's also been proven that it's a helpful practice to lessen our anxiety. The forms of prayer that allow us to move deeply into a state of stillness and attention do tend to quiet our minds, ease our worries, and provide mental clarity for whatever lays ahead. Some studies have even showed that patients with active prayer lives tend to be discharged from the hospital up to 3 times faster than those patients without. To me, I think of prayer as a sort of sigh, a release. And sighing has also been shown to provide a physiological relaxation to the body. It's our internal reset button that we hit when we're hitting our limits of tension, of worry, of stress. Will you join me? Let's try it together. Take a deep breath in, and let it out. Doesn't that feel good? So then there are those reasons that we can't exactly prove in a study. Many people have had very profound experiences during prayer. Of course, there are the many stories in sacred scriptures of miracles that have come as a result of prayer. There are healing ministries in many houses of worship, and even more nuanced anecdotes of deep clarity and conviction that have come as a result of personal prayer. I think of a former supervisor and mentor here. He often tells the story of the time he was visiting India in his early 20s. He was on a pilgrimage of sorts as he became more interested in Buddhism after growing up in a Hindu family here in California. He woke before dawn and found a large old tree that sat alone within a large field. Really the perfect place to meditate. And in his solitude, in those pre-dawn hours before and just as the sun was rising, he sat and he began to meditate. It was one of those experiences of meditation that felt life-changing for him. He was deeply into the mystery of the quiet and the stillness of his practice. And then as he was experiencing almost a trance-like state, he was awoken from it by a small group of people who stood around him. He was annoyed. He looked at the faces around him to try to see who was sort of bothering him during his moment of deep stillness. And as he looked, standing just a few feet away near the base of the tree, was none other than the Dalai Lama. One of the monks in the group said that this was one of the Holy One's favorite places to meditate, and asked if it was okay if they sat with him and joined him in their meditation. He said, yeah, of course, duh. Please, Dalai Lama, join me in our meditation. And for the next 20 minutes or so, he had the opportunity to meditate right alongside the Dalai Lama at the Dalai Lama's very favorite place to meditate in the whole world. Now that is what I call a profound prayer experience. But the thing about prayer is that, yes, it is sometimes extraordinary, like it was for my mentor. But for most people, for most of the time, prayer is part of the everyday. It's the mundane, the moments where it bubbles up within ourselves during a time of need. And Unitarian Universalism makes space for prayer practice in every which way it might come. In this expansive tradition of ours, we value the ways that prayer might manifest in your life. And it also values that it might not manifest at all. In fact, we've included these beliefs in 2 of our principles. We share a commitment to the acceptance of one another and an encouragement to spiritual growth in our congregations, as well as the free and responsible search for truth and meaning. And I understand these 2 principles to mean that we open ourselves to the many ways we connect with and seek transcendence, oneness, stillness, and sacredness. And we are open to the unique ways and journeys that those beside us in these pews are on as well. And this prayer journey isn't always easy. Sometimes it feels contrived or out of touch or forced. And sometimes we're too angry or disillusioned to pray. I know I've been there, and maybe some of you have too. But in reflecting on what it means to have a prayer life or meditative practice, I've been able to recognize the ways prayer can be a sacred grounding force in our lives. It can buoy us, it prompts us to give thanks, it connects us to loved ones, both near and far. And this realization about prayer became crystal clear for me during an experience I had just a few months ago. I was visiting a friend who was going through a difficult time in her life. She was in something of a crisis. And I did my best to be present for her and to listen to the emotion and anguish that was on her heart. It's often one of the best gifts that we can offer to loved ones in times of struggle. But still, I racked my brain for the right thing to do or to say for her in that moment. After some time of sitting quietly together, I realized that I had begun speaking. I had begun asking her a question, almost without noticing it. I said, "Can I read you some Psalms?" Almost yelling, she said, "Yes!" And I read aloud in part, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in right paths for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the darkest valley, I fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord my whole life long." I read this because I knew that for her, Scripture was central to her prayer life. She could recite passages from the Bible from memory as quickly and as easily as anyone that I had ever met. And even though she and I had different theologies and approaches and different connections to those words, what mattered in that moment was that they became our shared prayer, our moment of quiet and still together. And as I came upon her favorite passages within the Psalms, she would say them aloud with me. Reciting these words, these ancient prayers, we connected to something beyond ourselves in that moment. We were at the threshold together. Now, psalm is a Hebrew word that means song. The book of Psalms is part of the Hebrew Bible, which is held as sacred for many in the Jewish and Christian traditions and many others as well. Many find the words to be beautifully powerful pleas that make for amazing melodies to be sung. There are words that are read and recited and sung across many generations, across many continents, and across many languages. And in that moment, they were the prayer that we needed. I didn't have my own words to share. I didn't know what to say to her. I didn't have the words to soothe, to inspire, to bring hope. But I didn't have to. I was led to the words that needed to be said, to the prayer that needed to be shared aloud. This moment of prayerful recitation of the Psalms was a symbolic sigh for us both. So for me, prayer is like this moment that I had with my friend. We don't always know the words. We don't always know which way to go. We don't always know where to find hope. But in prayer, in meditation, in times of quiet, sometimes we are led into these questions that arise from our souls, and the words come. In that room with my friend, we were questioning how to make life meaningful in the midst of immense struggle. And as we heard in the reading from Rilke this morning, prayer is often living the questions. Our prayers are those deep life questions that we reflect on in our minds, that we say aloud on our knees, that we sing in a melody as a group. They are a gesture toward something more, whether that something is God, or a oneness with the universe, or perhaps a deeper connection to our own sense of awe. And sometimes prayer gives us a quiet moment to reconnect with and rediscover that wisdom that already resides in us. So in the spirit of living the questions, I encourage you to think now of a moment you felt most connected to prayer or meditation, or you had a profound moment of quiet. What were you thinking about? What was on your heart? Where were you? And as you reflect on that moment quietly, consider how you might continue to live your questions in whatever prayerful posture suits you best. So for me, my prayer life has certainly grown and evolved and changed, and I continue to ask myself how I can live my questions through prayer. And for those wondering, yes, my beloved toy did show back up after that first prayer at age 7. Turns out it was hiding under the couch. And I don't know if I exactly believe in that sort of prayer anymore, some 25 years removed from my own mini miracle, but I've got to tell you, it has stuck. Just last week, I couldn't find my sunglasses. I was looking all over the place, and I took a moment to sit quietly and put my hands on my hips, and I kind of sighed exasperated and started doing the sign of the cross. Dear St. Anthony, may it be so, and amen. I ask you now to stand in body